And I believe we are live. We will get started here shortly. Good morning, everybody. All right, it is 7 a.m. It is time for our live weekly podcast here at stellculinary.com. My name is Jacob Burton. Thank you so much for joining me. I remember when so my first real executive chef gig. I mean, so the first technical time I held the title was at a little tiny restaurant called Frederick's. It was a little Asian fusion bistro, and you know that's not even part of the story, but that was technically when I first held the title. I was there for about a year, and then I got recruited by Stella and the Cedar House Sport Hotel, which Stella is where the name of the podcast and website comes from. And I remember I was doing a wine dinner, one of my first wine dinners. Excuse me, and I was really nervous. And I've been working hard for a couple of weeks, prepping everything and pairing the wines, talking to the winemaker. I believe the winemaker was Michael Keenan, and we ended up becoming really good friends. I have tons of respect for this guy. And I at the beginning of the wine dinner, right? You always get up and give a talk. Hey, everyone, it's time to take your seats. Here's what we'll be doing tonight. And people are mingling around, and I step up to the plate, and the dining room's kind of buzzing. And guys, like probably 24, 25 at the time. Uh, and this server Grant, he's standing right next to me, and he could tell that I'm nervous, right? And I don't really know how to interrupt everybody. And he leans over to me and he says, "Hey, chef, how about you try good evening, ladies and gentlemen?" And so I did. I said, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." Everybody stopped and gave me their attention, and I was shocked that they were even paying attention to me. And I fumbled through my little preamble, and I got in the kitchen. I cooked my heart out, and it ended up being a great um, night and a great menu. But that is to say, it's always odd how you start one of these podcast episodes or just a live discussion in general. And I find sometimes the easiest thing to do is just to jump right in. Now, in the past, you may have noticed the absence of our entry music, and I haven't been using the entry music lately because we've been doing a live stream. And Facebook would probably flag it as a copyright infringement, which I own all the rights to the music. As far as, I mean, I've licensed it to use in my podcast, so it's all legal. But Facebook doesn't care. They'll put a strike against my account, and then I'll have to go and I'll have to review it, and I'll have to upload the documentation again for like the 100th time, and then they'll review it, and then maybe if they get around to it, they'll remove the strike. Maybe they won't. Doesn't really matter. So I just figure, we'll fire up the broadcast feed, jump right in. Now we are doing a live discussion. Sometimes I'm reading through your comments, and Joey just jumps into the mix and says, "Holy arts and crafts, Batman! That's quite the knitting room you have there, Grandma." And yeah, so I was actually it's funny you should mention that, Joseph, because I was in here last night setting up some stuff for the live stream and doing my notes, which you can see right here, my high tech note taking of what we will be discussing today, which, by the way, in case you were worried, this will be the most epic episode of the Stella Culinary School podcast ever. We have so much stuff to get to. But my wife's, so this used to be my office, okay? But I work quite a bit, and my wife does not, and she works at home. And she actually, so if you are a crocheter, she has a website called Pop Crochet that she does, and then she takes care of our daughter and helps keep my sanity. Um, and so she just slowly sort of encroached into my office with her arts and crafts room, and I figure, why fight it? You guys don't tune in for my background. All the guys, all the cool guys on YouTube that have all the awesome backgrounds, it's because they lack the confidence in their content, which I have right here. Also, one more little housekeeping note. You will notice that I have switched up the mic to the Shure SM7B, also known as the Thriller mic. This is the microphone that Michael Jackson recorded the album Thriller on, also known as the Joe Rogan mic. Because you see these, and every single podcaster has this mic. I wanted this mic before this mic was cool. This was the mic that I was going to buy one day when my podcast finally made it, which never happened, but I made it as a chef, so I bought it anyways. And I switched it up because I was getting some complaints. When I say some, I mean one, that the audio was a little bit low. But it came from a fellow kitchen worker who said, "Hey, chef, I'd like to listen to your podcast in the kitchen, and the audio's been low lately. So we're going to try switching up the mic and some post audio stuff." All right, so with all of that out of the way, I got a really cool meaty content that I'm excited to get to. I had a hard time sleeping last night, which is why I'm sucking down the coffee, which I always do anyways. But I was really excited to get to this stuff. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about my rib update, because I did do that rib test, and then we're gonna hop into a beef stroganoff sort of breakdown. And then after that, I got a bunch of other stuff that I keep on wanting to get to. So we might have a rapid fire round. And there's also a really great conversation over on the Stellar Culinary Facebook group about culinary rules that you break that I keep on meaning to get to, because some of the rules aren't really rules that you're breaking. And I think some of you feel that shame of breaking those rules, but you shouldn't, because they are not rules you should be following in the first place. So we might get to that. So last weekend, I did the pressure cooker ribs test, and after I had finished our podcast last Friday, someone had hopped into the comments and said, "Hey, I do this all the time, and I usually pressure cook the ribs for about 25 to 30 minutes instead of the 45 minutes, hour that you were thinking of." So I said, "Hey, sounds good. That's a good jumping off point." And I used that as a starting place. I took some photos, and eventually on these live streams, I'll be able to throw these photos up. But it's really what we're doing as an audio podcast, so I don't know how necessary that is. But I'm pulling up the photos on my phone right now I don't even know if you guys can see that. Anyways, to kind of give me a guided remembrance. But I started off by separating the ribs. So I used St. Louis style ribs, and I cut them into individual bones. Now, my team at the hotel, my managers, they got me for Christmas. They got me a bunch of Meat Church seasonings. So, not a sponsor. They actually, I guess they either they liked me enough, or they felt obligated, to kiss my ass enough to get me a cool little package for Christmas. So I don't know if you guys ever heard of the Meat Church rubs, but they got me like a whole set of them, and they were really good. So for these ribs, I used it was like their honey crunch, or their whatever their honey rub is, and it's delicious. I was sprinkling it in my hand, and just kind of munching away at that. And then so I seasoned the ribs, and I roasted them at 425, 450 in the oven for about 15 minutes, just to kind of get a brown coating, a wire rack on top. In the future, I may not roast them first, but I did that because I wanted to kind of coagulate some of the meat, and I was planning on using the broth, which we'll get to in a second, the resulting broth to make my sauce to glaze it. So I figured roast the meat first, kind of coagulate it. I don't think it was an unnecessary step, but I'm not sure it was necessary either. So roasted for about 15 minutes, got some nice color on the bones. Then I just dropped them into the pressure cooker and covered with a little bit of boxed chicken stock, which I use quite a bit. If I don't want to use like my real good chicken, like my homemade chicken stock. I don't want to use it for just a cooking medium, right? I'll use the box stuff because I don't necessarily want to dilute the flavor completely with using water. Although sometimes water is fine. So box chicken stock, coming about almost covering the bones completely. Pop the pressure top. Let the pressure pot come up to pressure. I don't know if you guys can see this in the live stream here, but it's I use like a 6 quart or an 8 quart pressure cooker. It's not a whole lot. Maybe I think it's like 6 quarts because it's about a gallon and a half. But I was surprised at how many bones I was able to fit. It was about a rack and a half of ribs because I had gone to Costco, got the St. Louis 3-pack, right? So I did about a rack and a half of ribs in the pressure cooker. I probably could have fit 2 racks total, which was cool, right? So cover with the lid, let it come to pressure, cooked for 30 minutes. Then instead of like just ripping off the valve and letting it squirt everywhere, I just turn off the heat, let the pressure drop naturally, and then open up the top, pull the ribs off, let those rest. So now I have a resulting broth, and I figure, hey, I'll take this broth, which ribs obviously have a ton of collagen in them. So it'll give me some nice gelatin body. I'll reduce this down. I'll use it as the base for my glaze. And at this point, I didn't really have a whole plan of attack. Oddly enough, it may shock you, but I very often, especially at home, walk into my kitchen with a zero plan. I just say, hey, I'm going to cook some ribs, or I'm going to cook some fish, and I kind of wing it because, God, life's too structured to not just get into your kitchen and cook sometimes. It's kind of like a musician who never jams, right? You're always looking at sheet music and playing it. I mean, I'm not a musician, but it doesn't sound fun to me. So I take the stock and I pass it through my strainer and I start ripping it down. Rip, 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 reduce, reduce. Now, if you've ever done like a braised short rib, excuse me, I'm going to need to get a cough button here eventually so I don't bug you guys with the, but you get a little tickle in your throat sometimes. And then the sniffles, it's all gross. It's all very unprofessional broadcasting. I really apologize. Okay, so I start ripping it down. I don't know if you could see this. Probably not. It looks like there's some glare there. But it's fatty, right? You got some fat floating on the top. It's just like if you had braised a short rib or braised like a shoulder. You're going to have some fat floating on the top. And if you try and reduce that down, it's going to become a greasy mess. So I skim, 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 skim. Now I start thinking to myself, I'm going to doctor this a little bit. So adding some fish sauce, a little bit of soy sauce, right? Not too much because it's a little salty component. So I'm just trying to get some umami, right? And kind of just seeing where we're at. And I'm tasting as it goes, tasting as it goes. And then I add in just a little bit of brown sugar, but I use the swerve, right? So don't hate me, but you guys know I'm trying to eat a little bit healthier. And I'm already cooking ribs, so I use the swerve, which is actually a pretty solid substitute for brown sugar. It's like a non-calorie brown sugar. You throw it on your oatmeal, it's pretty delicious. So now I'm kind of leaning towards like a low sugar teriyaki sauce. And I'm like, this is pretty rad. I got some ribs that are cooked. The texture's good. I'm gonna glaze them in this glaze. And everything's gonna be amazing. I'm gonna have a great story to tell. So it reduces down. The glaze is it's forming and it's getting thicker and it's getting thicker. And then I taste it, and at this point I realize, God, the glaze just isn't turning out good. Because I had forgotten about pork glazes. And here's the thing with pork, it makes delicious broths. When you reduce it down, it always gets funky. Pork makes horrible reduction sauces, and I always forget that, right? Because who would think that a beautiful porky broth full of gelatin would just make a funky reduction? But if you're doing a straight reduction where you're taking out all the liquid and you're basically using the collagen or the gelatin to thicken it, which is my preferred method for most meaty glazed sauces, then it gets really funky. And this is what separates mediocre chefs from good chefs from great chefs. is I fail probably way more than most cooks, right? And it's always funny. I feel like people are shocked when they hear like, "Oh my God, you fucked up a dish." Excuse my language. But yeah, it happens. It happens all the time. Fail fast, fail quick, right? And the difference is, I don't serve you my mistakes. Okay, and this was a mistake. I forgot that pork broth gets funky when you reduce it, right? And I had some mustard in there, right? It was forming a nice emulsion. It was getting all glazy. Like it had all the makings of being a really solid reduction glaze. But I was using a pork bone broth from St. Louis ribs. It was just funky. There was no way around it. And I had emotions invested in it. I had this cool story I was going to come back and tell the Stella Culinary community, and now I had to tell them about a failure, right? But what did I do? I took the thing, I dumped it down the sink. It wasn't good. All right. Um, so then I reached for just my good old fashioned teriyaki glaze that I keep in the pantry. Game on, right? Throw that in the wok. Take the ribs. I refired them. I put the oven back on to 425. Put the ribs into the wok with the teriyaki sauce. It's like a little sesame teriyaki glaze. And then just toss, toss, toss. The wok is just so good for glazing and tossing stuff just because of the shape. So now I'm tossing the ribs in this teriyaki glaze. I hit it with a little bit of fresh orange juice, kind of just half an orange that I squeeze in there. Tossy, 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 throw it onto a sheet pan lined with a silpat because I know, hey, look, it's amateur hour once, shame on me twice, or, well, dude, you can't fool me 3 times, right? So, the good old Bush quote. So I throw it down on a silpat because I don't want to start scorching my sauce. And I know that the sweetness of this glaze is going to go pretty quick. It's already bubbly. It's adhered to the ribs. So I pop it back into a 325 oven for about 5 minutes tops, and the ribs came out looking just beautiful and glazed. I hit them with a little bit of sesame seeds right while they were still hot. Put it on a plate. I did not have any fresh scallions, but if I was shooting a video, I'd for sure sprinkle with some fresh scallions. And the texture of the ribs was great. The flavor was great. And I got the whole thing done, even with my pork reduction screw up. I got it all done with in an hour, right? The timer for the steamed rice dinged and went off, and it was ready just in time. So I had some pretty solid teriyaki glazed ribs. No marination, no overnight stuff, none of the tricks that we normally throw at it, and they came out good. Now on a scale of 1 to 10, with Applebee's $12.99 ribs being a 1, that's kind of being generous. And competition ribs from Malcolm Reed being a number 10, and my normal ribs off of the barbecue, if I was being honest, like a 7. Okay. These were probably, and by the way, your friend next door who thinks he can cook really good ribs, who thinks they're like an 8 or a 9, they're really like a 3 or a 4. Okay, let's let's be honest. However, smoked rib meat is really kind of hard to screw up. So even Applebee's ribs aren't even that terrible. But we're just trying to establish a scale here, right? So my normal ribs, being a 7, which take me about anywhere from 4 to 6 hours from start to finish. I would probably put these guys at a solid 5, solid 6 on a scale of 1 to 10. And again, this is the scale of true solid. If you live in a city, okay, and you're hanging out with a bunch of city slickers and you make them these ribs where you pressure cook them and you glaze them in a wok and you toss them with a good teriyaki sauce that you maybe doctor a little bit, you're going to be making the best ribs in your friend group. Now, you live in a barbecue area and you bring these to the potluck, you might not get invited back just because, it's not how they do things. But on a Thursday night, you come home from work, you're kind of craving some ribs. This is a really good, solid technique, and it's something that I plan on working with a little bit more and having some fun with. So that is the rib update. Let's see, reducing swerve. Sounds like a recipe for disaster. Suggest adding beef stock would fix your pork reduction. There's no amount of beef stock that will fix a pork reduction unless you add like so much beef stock to where you can't really taste the pork reduction. And at that point, you may as well just be using beef stock. Now, you don't have to believe me. I understand. I understand it's not logical, right? I mean, pork is this beautiful meat from the gods. But I guarantee you, okay, you're gonna do a pork stock. There's some of you out there, you're gonna do a pork reduction, and you're gonna taste it, and you're gonna get all emotionally involved. And you're like, that's Chef Jacob. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's crazy. Pork reductions can't taste good. And you're gonna taste it, and you're gonna reduce it down, and you're gonna reduce it down. You're gonna taste it, and maybe you'll get as far as finishing with butter, and it's gonna turn into a nice glaze. And if you don't screw that up, right? If you don't break it because there's already too much fat in the stock, and it doesn't emulsify, then you might serve it, right? Be like, hey, look it, this idiot Chef Jacob, he just doesn't. Pork reductions don't work. Look, I made an awesome pork reduction. Look at how amazing this is. And you're going to lie to yourself, and you're going to like it, right? Because you lied to yourself, right? It happens. Trust me, it happens. And you're going to look around the table, and if you're really paying attention, you're going to get one of these. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Dad. Yeah, Mom. No, yeah. It really is good. Yeah. What is that, Chef Jacob? No. Okay. I'm just warning you. I'm warning you. It's okay, though. You can, and I know I'm going to get somebody. Someone's going to go out and do a pork reduction this weekend, and they're going to come back to the Facebook group, and they're going to be like, I did a pork reduction. It turned out delicious. I've done plenty. Trust me, it's not good. I'm just telling you, it's not good. Okay. We'll go through your comments here in a little bit, but we had in our recipe sharing section in our Discord group, which, by the way, I might be remiss to say, hey, we are live in our Discord group doing a live chat there, and I put a link in the description of this live stream. But somebody asked for a beef stroganoff recipe. And I thought to myself, you don't need a recipe for beef stroganoff. But that's also coming from a guy who believes you don't really need a recipe for anything. You don't even need a recipe for sourdough. Once you understand the look and the feel of the sourdough, I mean, you can. I teach people bread baking and sourdough baking to weigh it out by the gram, because everyone always wants to go rogue on you with their recipes. And so forcing people to weigh their ingredients by the gram, which even then they still refuse to do, helps to just eliminate that one little ratio factor when they inevitably come back and start whining about how the sourdough recipe didn't work and they only changed like 5 different things on it. So why did it not work, right? So the point being, if you but especially with savory food, you need a recipe when you want to recreate a specific dish, but not when you're having fun in your kitchen and cooking. When I cook, I track down the ingredients. Here's a test recipe that I was working on where everything's in the grams, and I write down the ingredients, because eventually I'm going to have to take this recipe, I'm going to have to format it and make it reproducible and give it to my cooks in the culinary team so they can reproduce it when I'm not there. That's the purpose of a recipe. So if Grandma has like an amazing beef stroganoff recipe, which, trust me, Grandma wasn't as good as a cook as you thought she was. I hate to break it to you, okay? Grandma was an amazing lady, and her house was just this beautiful, safe space. You always looked forward to going to it, and she would cook you dinners from scratch, and you would sit there and you would eat them, and you look lovingly at Grandma and think this is the best thing ever, right? It's the nostalgia, it's the feel that Grandma gave you that was the secret seasoning to all of her food, all right? Most people's grandmas weren't that great of cooks. I'm sorry to have to break it to you. But if you want to recreate that nostalgia, you're, number one, it's going to be hard, right? Because you're not at Grandma's house anymore. You're at your house, and your kids are screaming, they're running around, and you're in a pissed off mood because you're all stressed out because you're trying to execute this dish because you didn't listen to Chef Jacob on how to execute, right? So now You're trying to recreate her stroganoff recipe, and it doesn't taste the same because you don't have that nostalgic seasoning. So, what's the point? The point is recipes aren't necessary in the vast majority of things. That's why I created the F-STEP process, the F-STEP curriculum, right? You got flavor, sauce, technique, execution, preparation. All right. So those of you who have seen some of my bootcamp content, that's where that whole thing comes from. But it's also it's a process that we use to look at and research food. So for an example, let's take the example of the beef stroganoff, and I mean we all know what beef stroganoff is, right? But let's just pretend for a second that we don't know, right? So first place I go to is Wikipedia. Because Wikipedia, it usually gives you a few lists of things, and so you look it up, you go, okay, beef stroganoff is a Russian dish with sauteed pieces of beef served in a sauce with smetana, which I know I'm slaying that word, but it's basically their version of sour cream. So from its origins, it's mid-19th century, it's become popular around the world with considerable variations from the original recipe, and I'm already bored. I'm bored. Okay, cool. I get the gist of it. I kind of understand what it is. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to, Google search beef stroganoff. I'm going to look. Okay, it looks like there's some onions there, and a lot of these pictures have some mushrooms, and they're served over egg noodles. Wikipedia says that's not traditional, but that's how I remember Grandma serving it, so that's how I'm going to serve it. So it looks like you're sauteing some beef with some mushrooms and some onions, and it's put in a meaty sauce with that's mounted with some sour cream to kind of turn it into a glaze. Sometimes if you want to get fancy, you got some herbs. Okay, cool. I got it. Now I have a broad overview of what beef stroganoff is. What is it? Well, it is a dish of beef that is cooked in sauce. So what does that tell you? Well, normally you would use a tougher cut of meat if you're going to cook something in sauce, because we know that the premium you pay on steak cuts is because of their tenderness and their juiciness and their fat content, right? A prime steak is a prime steak because of the intramuscular fat marbling. That's what brings that flavor and that tenderness. So you can buy a prime filet of beef, or also known as a filet mignon or a beef tenderloin, and pay 150, 200 bucks, maybe sometimes more for that whole tenderloin, trim it up, and simmer it in your beef stroganoff sauce, and it'll be good. But that premium that you're paying, it's like cooking with $1,000 bottle of wine. It just doesn't make any sense. Okay, so you want to go with a cheaper cut of meat that's going to be tougher, and like we talked about in our last episode, those tougher meats that get more work, so they come from the shoulder region or some of the other regions that aren't the steak regions. They tend to have more flavor because you have more myoglobin, more collagen, more connective tissue. So you break that down, and it translates into more flavor. However, we know it's going to be tough, right? So we got to figure out a way to keep that from getting tough. Now, what is our sauce? Well, our sauce, when you put it through the lens of the three modern mother sauces, is a reduction, right? Excuse me again. So any sauce you make will be prepared with one of three techniques: emulsification, puree, or reduction. All right, so here it's a meat-based sauce, it's a stock-based sauce, so we're more than likely going to be doing a reduction. Now, when you look at the reduction process, normally you have the broth making process where you make your stock, right? So that's just your normal stock making process. Then you have the reduction and reinforcement process where you have time to then take that stock, you add more fresh ingredients to it, sometimes roasted, sometimes fresh. But this is where you start to sort of hone in on the flavor structure, what your final sauce will be. Then you have your final reduction phase, where you add in your last minute seasonings, usually some fresh herbs, and then you a lot of times will finish with fat, namely, especially in French cuisine, you finish with butter. So you stir that butter in. Right, so here, what's our fat? Well, instead of fat, we're using sour cream to finish. Right, so it's the same technique that holds true, but we're just switching up the flavor structure. So again, flavor plus technique equals the dish that you're trying to create. Right, so our flavor structure is now going to be this beef-based stock or broth that we then finish with some sour cream. Now, what do we know about sour cream? Well, it's fatty and it's rich and it's delicious. And fatty and rich and delicious things, they have a tendency to coat your palate and squelch flavors. So we're going to need some ingredients that push through that fat. Okay, so personally, I like a good dose of black pepper in my beef stroganoff. And what do we know about black pepper? Well, black pepper is a spice. Most of the flavor comes from essential oils. So if you really want to be a culinary gangster about it, you're going to use whole dried black peppercorns. You're going to toast them in a pan, in a dry pan over medium-high heat until they become fragrant and they start to let off an aroma, right? So that's awakening or releasing, unlocking those essential oils. And then you're going to take that black pepper and you're going to grind it fresh, okay? That's the real culinary gangster move. Do I do that every single night? No, I got a life to live, right? If it's Wednesday night, I'm just going to reach for the pepper grinder and grind it in, okay? But there's different levels, so you can attack or you can approach this with different levels. But it's all still technique and flavor structure. So we're going to have some black pepper. The piquancy of that black pepper is going to push through the richness of the overall dish itself. And also some acid, right? Now, the acid can come in many forms. It could come in your various vinegars. A red vinegar, I think, would be appropriate. You could use a higher end vinegar. But sometimes for a traditional dish like a stroganoff, I feel like if you try and get too fancy, it's a lot of times will lose its charm. Okay, so you don't need some crazy high-end like Moscato vinegar. You could use it; might be delicious, but you don't really need it. It's like a red wine vinegar, but for me, I always lean citrus. I love lemon. I think lemon is just a great brightener, right? I don't necessarily want my sauce to taste lemony, but lemon and sour cream, they play off of each other nicely. So I'm going to use a little bit of lemon at the end to cut through everything. Okay, so now we kind of have our sauce planned out, and we're going to, refine it as we go. So now what else do we need? Well, we're going to need some mushrooms and some onions. Now for the mushrooms, you could use just your regular button mushrooms, right? The white button mushrooms you get at the store. You could use the cremini mushrooms. You could use portobello mushrooms. Or you could get fancy. You go hunt down some wild mushrooms. You can get some morel mushrooms. You can get, at Whole Foods and other higher end supermarkets, they sell like the mushroom sample packs that you see me using in some of my videos when I'm in the professional kitchen. Now, in the past, we actually have done a short rib beef stroganoff as an entree as part of a tasting menu. And because it's part of a tasting menu, well, what are we doing? We're using a more premium cut of meat, a really nice thick piece of short rib. And then we're using morel mushrooms because morels and cream go great. And of course, you have the creaminess from the sour cream in your reduction sauce. We're using a veal broth, right? So by how you choose your ingredients, you're redefining that flavor structure to suit the crowd that you're cooking for, or to suit your final intention. So finally, that brings us to the beef component, right, or the meat component. So you could use, like I think, let's go back again. I'll look at, so what did Wikipedia say was the traditional meat? Like it was a chuck or, and I don't even really care, right? Like I don't. It's a meat cooked in a sauce. Now, if I was trying to nail an actual, like, if I was entering a contest for who could make, the most mundane version of a classic beef stroganoff, and I do all my research and I use all the, the proper cuts to try and nail that. But they probably traditionally use like, some chuck, and I've even seen, more lower end recipes where they use just ground beef and a can of cream and mushroom soup, right? It's turned into, so you're kind of, it just depends on what you want to do. So you could use a short rib if you want to do a higher end version of the beef stroganoff. And here's how you would do it. So in last week, we were talking about the struggles of home cooks getting veal bones, right? You don't need veal bones. You have your reinforced and reduced roasted chicken stock. So you would braise your short ribs like you always do, and I have videos on this stuff. So you braise your short ribs, and then you take that braising liquid and you reinforce and you reduce until it turns into a glaze. You finish that glaze. Now, what I would probably do is after you've braised the short ribs and you have the resulting braising liquid, I would set it aside, let it settle, skim off the fat. And then in a separate pan, now remember, you already have your short rib meat cooked and kind of set aside. So in a separate pan, I would start my onions and my mushrooms, right? I get those going, saute them up. Now what's going to happen? I'm going to add a little bit of brown butter. That's going to start to form a fond at the bottom of the pan. It's going to get those nice little brown nummy bits, right? So we're going to want to harvest that fond. We're going to want to deglaze it. We're doing a rich brown beef reduction. So traditional deglazing would be a wine, right? Red wine. But you can use anything. You could use cognac. Cognac could be kind of pimp. You'd call it like a, hey, this is my beef stroganoff with a cognac veal reduction sauce. I mean, how sexy does that sound, right? So you see how just by switching up a few ingredients, you can kind of bring some sex appeal to even a simple dish. But let's just say you're at home, you got the box red cooking wine, right? Because you're not using your good Burgundy for this, right? You're drinking your good Burgundy, right? You use your boring red box cooking wine, you deglaze, scrape, you release that fond, and now you want to reduce that wine by at least half because that's going to take off the harshness of the alcohol. So now in your pan you have harvested fond that has been dissolved in your reducing red wine with your roasted mushrooms and onions. Now you're going to add your harvested braising liquid back into the pan, and you're going to reduce, and you're going to watch for that fat to kind of come to the top. Even though you skimmed it once, there's still going to be more released. So skim so it doesn't get all fatty. For a little bit of an insurance policy, add in just a tiny little squirt of mustard. That mustard is going to act as an emulsifier and keep the whole thing from breaking later on down the line. And just a little squirt isn't going to be enough to even make it mustardy. Okay. Now would probably be a good time to be thinking about your egg noodles. I mean, come on, people. They're egg noodles. They're simple, okay? You should already have a pot of water off on another burner, ready to go, salted if you like, unsalted if you don't like. Doesn't really matter. Okay, just have that pasta water in a pot, boiling so you're ready to go. Egg noodles only take a couple minutes. So now you're thinking about your egg noodles, thinking about your dish, okay? And now you take your egg noodles, maybe you hold them off for a second because you don't have your short ribs in your saute pan yet. So now you put your chunks of short rib meat back in. You start to reheat those as you're reducing your sauce, and then you drop your egg noodles. Now, egg noodles are done. They're in the colander. It's time for the final approach, okay? One thing you can do is you can toss the egg noodles back into the pot that now doesn't have any water in it, okay? And you could add a little bit of your broth, your reducing broth, to those noodles if you want to glaze them a little bit. Okay, if not, just leave them as is. Toss them a little bit of butter, a little bit of garlic powder if you want. You can get all crazy or not crazy. Doesn't really matter. Now you have, for all intents and purposes, a reduction sauce sitting in your pan. You have your chunks of heated through short rib, which at this point I'd probably remove again. Okay, because we're going to use that short rib, we're going to use that premium meat as our garnish. So I'm going to remove that again, put it on the plate. Now it's all steaming and hot, sitting right next to my stove. The reduction sauce is almost perfect. I'm checking with a spoon. It's about that little nappe stage. Okay, so now once the reduction is what we call nappe, where it's coating the back of a spoon, it's time to finish it. Okay, finisher. So what happens if we take our sour cream and we drop it directly into the pan and we bring it to a boil? Well, it's going to break on you. It's going to become a greasy mess. Okay, sour cream is an emulsion. It's water and fat. So we want to turn the heat to low at the very least, or maybe kill the heat entirely. Stir in that sour cream, and then we're doing final finishing. Okay, we're going through our reduction sauce finishing stage. Okay, so we stir that sour cream in. What do we know? Okay, well, we're bringing some fat to the party. That fat's going to mute some of the flavors. So now we're going to balance some of that fat with some acid. I chose lemon. You could choose whatever acid you like. That's your basic flavor structure that you cook in the kitchen. Okay, you're the one eating this. Okay, I'm going to choose a little bit of lemon. A little bit of lemon. Also, too, because I planned ahead a little bit, I thought to myself, what would be really good in this is tarragon and some chives. So I got some tarragon, some chives. I throw it in, right, stir it around. Now I got some nice green, fresh herbs floating around in my beef stroganoff sauce. Okay. Now I got this beautiful glaze that I taste. I say to myself, hey, does it need anything? Does it need any salt? Nope, it's all good to go. At this point, it has that black pepper in there that we, toasted and ground up. That was thrown in to taste. Egg noodles go on the plate. Spoon a little bit of this beautiful glazed reduction gravy over the top. Garnish with a chunk of short rib or two, maybe a little bit of extra sauce on top of the short rib, and then you can sprinkle with a little bit more herbs. Boom! Beautiful, beautiful beef stroganoff dish, right? Without a recipe. And you can get it as fancy as you want. Now, maybe you don't want to go short rib. Maybe you don't want to go the whole braising, right? Maybe you want something that's a little bit faster. Tri-tip. Love tri-tip. You know that. Tri-tip is great here. And if you want to even get a little crazy, a little silly, okay, here's a trick the Russians don't know. It's called alkaline marinades. We steal this from Chinese cooking is where I discovered it now, but you see it a lot in Asian cuisine. Okay, so we're going to take our tri-tip, we're going to slice it up nice and thin. You're going to have your roasted chicken stock off to the side somewhere, all ready to rock. Take the sliced tri-tip. You're going to sprinkle it with some salt, a little bit of baking soda that raises the pH, and an egg white. You're going to stir that in, and then you can throw in whatever else you want. So here, I'm going to throw in a little bit of Worcestershire sauce because that's kind of traditional in beef stroganoff, and you can also dash some of that into your beef stroganoff sauce if you want. Now, you know what Worcestershire sauce is it's just it's fish sauce for white people, right? It's not as scary, it's not as funky as fish sauce, right? But I would dare say it's also not as delicious as fish sauce. So let's skip the Worcestershire sauce, right? Because we're not trying to impress grandma here. We're trying to make the best flavored dish possible. And we're going to add into our little meat marinade here just a little dash of good fish sauce, a little dash of soy sauce. If you've listened to my flavor structure lecture series, you know that the soy sauce and the fish sauce have a synergistic relationship. They create that umami, okay? Hell, let's throw in just a little dash of MSG too. Let's get real crazy. Let's get funky, okay? So now in this pot, we got our alkaline, we got our pH raised with the egg whites and the baking soda, little pinch of salt, maybe some good California garlic powder, the only garlic powder I use, some fish sauce, some soy sauce, and a little bit of MSG for a real umami bomb, okay? Toss this stuff around, throw in just a little touch of cornstarch, just enough to where it clings to the meat. Now, this isn't your normal Western juicy style marinade, okay? This is a drier marinade that you want kind of clinging to the meat. So don't get all crazy. Don't add in too much of your liquids. It's just enough to coat the meat, and you add just a little sprinkling of cornstarch to help dissolve into this liquid and coat the pieces of the meat. So now it's the same thing, but you're going kind of like wok style Chinese cooking approach on this, where you're stir frying everything, okay? So I'm going to stir fry my onions and my wok, get that wok hei flavor, which is that nice hot char, which you can get at home if you have a good, even an electrical burner, but if you have a good gas range, you get your wok nice and hot. And the trick is don't overload your wok. Get that wok screaming hot and cook your ingredients in small batches. So I'm going to throw in my onion, cook, set off to the side on a plate. I'm going to put the wok back on the heat. Uh-oh, drop my notes. Wok goes back on the heat, and I'm going to do my mushrooms. Cook. A little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, set off to the side. Okay, now I'm going to finish with my tri-tip. So tri-tip goes in the pan. I'm going to break it apart with my wooden spoon. Cook in my wok. Add the mushrooms back in. Add the onions back in. Add my reinforced and reduced beef stock with a good handful of black pepper in. Toss. Add in some sour cream. Smooth it out. Finish. Add in your fresh herbs. Pour it over some noodles, some egg noodles, and you're good to go. I saw in one of the comments earlier it was a spatzel. So you can do some spatzel at home with it. And, I mean, come on. How good is that? How good is that beef? Who's cooking beef stroganoff this weekend? All right, let's check out the comments. Norma suggests for a jus for your acid stroganoff. That's a great suggestion. Spatzel was suggested here instead of egg noodles. Yep, got to that. So as you can see, by harnessing our basic approach of flavor structure plus technique, we are able to recreate a beef stroganoff and turn it into our version of it, which I guarantee you is going to be great. You start using a full reduction sauce with some marinated tri-tip or some slow braised short ribs, some good high-end mushrooms. You use that and make a beef stroganoff, you're gonna be blowing people's minds. And again, like we discussed in last episode, which was another banger. If you missed it, you should have tuned into that one. We were talking about demoralizing your culinary competition with that pot roast, right? And that whole method that we went through. I'm not going to recreate here because it was quite the discussion, about as long as our stroganoff discussion just was. Right, but you're taking something that people know, that they can reference, that they understand, right? A pot roast, a stroganoff, something that most people have a reference point for, and you're applying professional level flavor structure and technique to this dish, and you're blowing their minds. Okay, because I guarantee you, Grandma didn't listen to my F is for Flavor lectures. She didn't listen to my T is for Technique lectures. And if she did, your grandma's a badass. All right? You're one lucky person. Okay. Before we move on to possibly our next topic, let's check out your comments. Cold Heat. Sounds like a good meal to me. I'll try it. How about some enthusiasm, Cold Heat? Sounds like a good meal to me. How epic, right? How about epic? Sounds like an epic meal to me. Cold Heat, underselling my beef stroganoff. All right. Oh, a non-relevant question from Dave. There has to be food you do not like. What is it? Well, that's a great question, Dave. And I have a philosophy on this. There is no such thing as a bad ingredient, just bad chefs or bad execution. And to every rule, there is an example that breaks that rule. And in this case, that's durian fruit. Durian fruit has zero, I don't know. It's durian fruit just screams, "Hey, dummy, don't eat me. I'm big and round and spiky, and if I fall on your head, I will crush your skull and kill you in the most savage way. And when you split me open, my flesh smells like rotting human flesh that's been rubbed in garlic. Do not put me in your mouth. I do not taste good. Oh, I'm gonna put you in my mouth anyways, durian fruit." And it's awful. It tastes awful. Now, I'm sure, I mean, we could talk about, like, fermented, like, shark and all that crazy stuff, but that doesn't count. There's certain, like, classic dishes that I'm convinced that cultures do just because they enjoy torturing tourists with it. Like, hey guys, look, here's the thing. If we could just train ourselves from a very young age to like this foul tasting shit over here, then when we have tourists come to our village, we could say, yeah, hey, look, this is a delicacy. We can put it in our mouths with a straight face, force them to eat it, and then later we could all laugh at their expense. Now, maybe there are people who actually like fermented shark, but I've never met somebody who grew up outside of a culture that serves that kind of food, that actually likes it. Now, oddly enough, when I was younger, when I was a little kid, we used to get exchange students from different countries that would stay with us for the summer, which is a lot of fun. And we got a couple different exchange students from Japan. And I think that's actually how my fascination with Asian cuisine started. I remember one of them made me a tamago egg for breakfast, and it was absolutely delicious. It blew my mind. Like 10 or 11 years old. Now, I don't know if things have changed since then. That's probably a good, more than 20 years ago. But the Japanese exchange students that we had universally hated peanut butter. I don't know why. They universally just hated it. And I remember giving them, giving one of the exchange students a Reese's peanut butter cup, which is one of my all-time favorite candies. It's chocolate, it's peanut butter. What's not to like? He puts it in his mouth, and he reacts to it as I would imagine myself reacting to fermented shark. So there always is room for cultural things, but I really do have this sort of this theory that a lot of those like really funky cultural dishes are there just to have fun at the expense of some tourists, which good for you. So Dave, that's it. There's no such thing as a bad ingredient, just bad chefs, except for durian fruit. Um, we got some people liking the rib update. Pork fat rules. That is true. Pork fat does rule. Um, so John says I listened to you on my phone. Can't do Discord and the live stream at once. We're gonna come up with some solutions. We're still kind of finding our footing here with the live stream. But right now, I think it's a good solution. We got the live Discord chat. Um, and we got the live stream here. So we'll continue to evolve this show as we go. We got someone honest. Grandma couldn't cook worth a damn, but she was a pie making fool. Best buttermilk and apple pie I've ever had. And she made an amazing cottage cheese pie that she took to the grave, and I can't find a recipe even close to it. Yeah, and that's the thing is, so my I have a step grandma on my mom's side, Grandma Joan, and she was always known as a great cook, right? And like a legit like solid cook. We would go to her house for Christmas Eve, and she'd always have like a really nice spread laid out, and always well planned, and just really really nice how she would do it. Come to find out, years later, she hated cooking. She never even liked it, right? But it was just she felt like this obligation to have a great Christmas dinner for everybody. So she forced herself to learn how to cook some solid dishes. So everyone kind of has like their solid go-to dishes, and I think every grandma has like that one or two dish. But also too, don't let your nostalgia fool you. Okay, there's a lot of really bad grandma and mama and papa dishes out there that really aren't that good, but because you grew up with them, um, you think they are, which is fine, which is fine. Shiitake mushrooms, yep, those will work. Um, Chef, you plan to post this video online like YouTube? I'm at work and would like to review this later. So the video replay can be found in our Facebook group, and the audio replay will be found on all of our podcast channels. So if you subscribe to the audio podcast, this pops up, which really, I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but you don't really need a visual element to enjoy this. In fact, I would say that the visual element, unless you want to see my massive crochet knitting room, it's not knitting, it's crochet. I'm gonna get in trouble now. A craft room background. There really is no redeeming quality to the video except that it's live and you can interact live. So really, probably the best way to consume this is while you're in the kitchen prepping for the weekend. Listening to this on earbuds or your loudspeaker, or while you're driving to work or running around. But yeah, so the replay will be there. I don't post these to YouTube anymore. Oh wait, no, I don't want to do that. I almost ended the live stream. I don't post these to YouTube anymore because I don't think YouTube's the appropriate place for this. I know a lot of people they post their long form podcasts, and I do have a small subset of people on YouTube that enjoy the live streams. But my YouTube channel, I think, is better off with just the actual focused videos, which I am working on. There will be more videos coming out soon. This year for 2021, I'm really trying to take what I use in my professional life, which is create momentum and lock in, basically you lock in a routine and then you build on that routine and apply that to Stella Culinary to get you guys more consistent content. That's why we're doing these live podcasts every single week, every Friday at 7 a.m. We're doing the live podcast so I can get you a podcast where we talk food at least once a week. Next step is a video once a week. But what I'm doing is I'm focusing on getting this podcast out to you. I'm working on some videos in the background. And then once those start to drop, the idea is to keep that momentum and to drop one video a week. and we'll start building on top of that. All right, all right. Okay, so I think that's it for our questions. My grandma was a dietitian and chef for the athletic department at LSU. She was pretty good at cooking. Too bad I didn't pay more attention. Yeah, I bet she was actually pretty good. It was fun to watch you pretend to cook stuff in your imagined pan. That's how I do. I visualize, right? And that's also too. So when we talk about F-STEP, right, the F-STEP curriculum, people always ask me about the sheet, which I got to do a video on, right? You can see me holding up the F-STEP sheet. So F-STEP is not only how I like to teach people how to cook, right? But it's also it's a mental model for creating a dish. So that's why we have our F-STEP sheet. And the way that this works, right? And I wasn't even really planning on doing this, but I happen to have it in front of me. Is before you cook anything, you got to know your flavor, okay? So you put your flavor as your main ingredient. You're gonna have some secondary ingredients. So you got your flavor, which is gonna be your beef. We're doing a beef stroganoff, and you're gonna have sour cream, fresh herbs, yada yada yada, mushrooms. Okay, those are gonna be your secondary flavors. Then what's your sauce gonna be? Well, we're gonna do a reduction sauce, right? Then what's your technique gonna be? Well, if we're using short ribs, we're gonna braise. If we're using tri-tip, we're gonna stir fry. And then how am I gonna execute this? How am I gonna make sure I get it to the plate hot? Well, I'm gonna have my noodles ready to go at the right time. I'm gonna put them on the plate. I'm gonna dump my my stroganoff sauce over the top, and it's good to go. And that's my execution. Okay. In a kitchen, the execution would be a little more involved, but pretty much the same in a professional kitchen. So now, after I've gone through my flavor structure, my sauce, my technique, I've chosen my technique, I have a plan in place, and I've thought to myself, how am I going to execute this? Because that's at this stage where things fall apart. Right? Maybe you don't have a big enough pot or a big enough wok to cook this stroganoff for 20 people at your next family gathering. So instead, you're going to pre-make all this stuff, and you're going to put it into a hotel pan, and you're going to cover it with a little bit of extra sauce. You're going to undercook the noodles a little bit, and you're going to put some foil over the top, and then you're going to retherm that, and then when it comes out, you're going to sprinkle it with some herbs, right? So now you just rethought your execution. Because you thought ahead, you're not sitting here freaking out, right? Trying to cook like 20 different batches of stroganoff all minute when you're really supposed to be talking to your friends and family and entertaining, right? So then once you get to the execution stage and you check that box, now it's time to actually do the prep side, right? So you have like a prep sheet that you write here. And so it's a sauce base. Is it stock? Yeah, so if it's a stock base like we had in the stroganoff, that's to remind you, hey, dummy, make a stock. I can't tell you how many people will want to do a reduction sauce, and they'll start like browning their short ribs and be like, oh shit, I don't have a stock. Well, yeah, so that's why you write prep sheets, right? At the end of every shift, a good professional cook, meaning somebody who gets paid to actually cook for a living, they write a prep list. And if they don't, they get fired because they're not a professional cook. That's like, do not pass go, do not collect $200. If you're not writing a prep list at the end of each shift to walk into success the next day, you're not really a professional cook. Okay, so you have the prep section. So again, I'm not going to rehash all this stuff because we just spent some time going through it. But that's sort of the mental model of creating a dish. What is my overall flavor structure? Am I going to have a sauce? Okay, so what's my sauce going to be? What's the technique going to be? How is it going to affect my overall dish? Okay, cool. Now, what technique am I going to use to cook my main ingredient? Well, I'm going to braise. I'm going to stir fry. I'm going to, yada, yada, yada. If you're doing a tough cut, you're going to use some sort of slow, moist cooking method for the most part. You're going to slow smoke it. You're going to slow roast it. You're going to braise it, right? Those slow techniques because you got to break down that collagen. If you're using a less tougher cut, like a tri-tip, you can get away with hot and fast, stir fry, sear, roast, yada, 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 okay? And then, you got to think about your execution, then write your prep list, and only then, right? So we've just cooked this, we've done this whole meal, we've done this whole stroganoff meal in our brains, okay? Drinking coffee, hanging out on a Friday morning. I haven't even stepped in the kitchen yet. But because I visualized it, now I can write my shopping list. Now I can write my prep list. Now I can go into the weekend with a plan of attack, make an amazing beef stroganoff, and execute. Okay, that's the difference between amateur cooking and professional cooking. Can you share a copy of that sheet on Facebook? Maybe. We'll see. This is available in the bootcamp curriculum. And I'm not sure how helpful this sheet will be without the culinary bootcamp curriculum. So we shall see on that. All right, how are we doing on time? Okay, we're just at about an hour. So I want to get to one last thing. We'll do a little bit of a rapid fire round. Actually, two quick things. Okay, number one, last week when we talked about the pot roast and talking about bringing it, because it's a tough cut of meat, bringing the internal temperature to 203, there is some confusion on sous vide cooking, and so, well, if we got to bring it to 203 internal, then why can I slow cook something sous vide at, say, 140 degrees Fahrenheit for 48 hours and it comes out tender? That's because there's basically a thermal tenderness curve. So if you're doing a traditional cooking method outside of sous vide or a combi oven, for the most part, you're going to want to hit that internal temperature of 203. Without that, if you're doing something sous vide, yes, you can cook something to tender if it's a tough cut of meat at 140 or 160 degrees Fahrenheit, but you got to hold it there for longer. So it's basically, think of it as like a thermal time and temperature curve. The lower your temperature, the longer you're going to cook it for. That's why you see recipes when it comes to sous vide for 48-hour short ribs and 32-hour short ribs and that sort of thing. And then I want to get into the cooking rules that you break. I think that's a good topic to finish with. I haven't had a chance to really review all of these, but we will see where we go, where it hits us. We'll just try and kind of rapid fire through. And for whatever reason, my internet is taking a while to load on this one. It might be the live stream. All right, don't cut bread until it has cooled completely. That takes a lot of discipline and restraint, but also your crumb will suffer. It will suffer. But yeah, it's really hard. And if I mean, if you're just making the bread for yourself, by all means, cut it open while it's still steamy. Spread it with some butter, sprinkle with some sea salt, and have at it. Proper finger position when cutting. That's from Chris. Now, one of the things, accurate cuts for the home kitchen and the home cook are kind of overrated for the most part. However, you should understand how to hold a chef's knife and how to use your guide hand. It's safer, it's more efficient. And this is the thing, right? I always get roped into helping my mom cook, especially on the holidays. And her specific reasoning why isn't because, oh, well, Jacob, you're a professional chef and your food's so delicious and your palate's amazing. We love how you cook, right? It's, Jacob, you're such a good chopper. Please come help me chop, right? It's because I have professional guide hand technique and knife skills that I use constantly and consistently. Now, the reason why that's important isn't necessarily because my dice for the stuffing on Thanksgiving needs to be perfect, right? It's because the more efficient and effective you are with your prep techniques, and your knife skills being one of the bigger prep techniques, the more you can do in a kitchen. If it takes me 45 seconds to break down a whole chicken and another 20 seconds to dice an onion, right? I have way more capacity than somebody who those two simple prep things takes 10 or 20 minutes for. And there's people who will take 10 minutes, 12 minutes to butcher a chicken poorly and to cut an onion poorly, right? So by practicing good guide hand technique, by holding your knife properly, we have a whole section. If you go to stellarculinary.com/CKS, it'll drop you in our knife skills section. It's all about becoming more efficient. So if you're professional, you need to have good knife skills because it's part of being a professional cook. And when you're a chef, having poor knife skills, like an actual, like a head chef, right? When your title is chef and you're showing somebody how to dice an onion and it looks atrocious, it's really, really embarrassing, and you really shouldn't be a chef. But as a home cook, focus less on perfection of the actual cut, which is less important unless you really want to focus on that. but focus more on your speed and efficiency. And the only way to be fast and efficient with your knife cuts is using that claw technique and getting comfortable with that. I see people who spend hundreds of dollars on really nice high-end chef's knife, and they can't even use their claw hand. I may get booted for this one, but when I'm feeling get lazy, I use pre-chopped garlic from a jar. I'm assuming that it's a rule to use fresh garlic. However, I use pre-chopped garlic at home all the time, right? I got a life to live, okay? People pay me to chop garlic fresh. Well, actually, they pay me to pay cooks to chop garlic fresh, but that doesn't really matter. The tube stuff for a prepared garlic product is better than the jarred stuff, in my opinion. I use both. And, one of the things that I wish I could have asked Anthony Bourdain before he died is in his book, Kitchen Confidential, he bashes chefs that use the pre-peeled garlic cloves. They come in a bag, right? And most everyone uses like the Christopher's Ranch garlic cloves. No, you're not a good chef if you use pre-peeled garlic. And every single restaurant I've ever worked in, high-end, doesn't matter, has pre-peeled garlic. Okay. Why? Because peeling garlic takes forever and time is money. You got to literally pay people to peel your garlic. And there really isn't that much of a flavor loss. When I did a dinner with Hank Shaw, he shamed me ruthlessly because I was using pre-peeled garlic. I'm like, bro, everyone uses pre-peeled garlic. You go to a Michelin-star restaurant, they got pre-peeled garlic. Okay, it takes forever. I got a recipe over here with 40 cloves of garlic in it, and then after that, I got to make 2 more recipes that use 100 cloves of garlic. Okay, shut up. I'm using the pre-peeled stuff. Time is money. I never cream sugar and butter for shortening when making cookies. It's not. It will actually help the texture if you cream it for a long time, but whatever. If the cookies are coming out good. Peeling tomatoes with boiling water and ice technique, also known as concasse. So you're removing the seeds. You don't do that, or you don't do it for the sauce. It's not really necessary. I try to break as many rules as possible with sourdough. That a boy, Jonah. I use the scraping method instead of tossing. White flour, I'm only my starter. So he only uses white flour in a starter. And my method for folds is usually, oh damn, I forgot I was making bread. Run to the kitchen. That's how I make my sourdough, right? Again, when I shoot a video on how to make a sourdough boule, it's because people don't know how to make a sourdough boule. So I got to remove as much of the variables as possible, which is why I give you time frames and temperatures and gram measurements. But when I'm baking sourdough bread at my house, I'm like, here's some starter. Here's some flour. Here's some water. Mix it together. Ooh, it looks a little bit loose. I'm going to add in a little more flour. Let it auto-lease or hydrate. Come back. I will, measure my salt, but you could just get away with a couple of pinches of salt. It doesn't need that much. And you kind of forget about it. You do some stretch and fold. Oh, hey, it looks like it, the bulk ferment doubled in size. Okay, now it's time to portion into individual boules. Let that double in size. After you shape it, you bake it, you're all good to go. Most of the knife safety rules. That's a good way to have a bad day. Put Parmesan or Pecorino in my fish pasta dishes. That's because it's delicious. I know it's a no-no, but I mean, come on. Parmesan and Pecorino, especially the good stuff, it's basically just dried umami. Okay, so you're grating dried salted umami over a fish dish that happens to contain pasta. Now you start like melting like big gobs of mozzarella. Might be a different story. I skipped the mise en place because you're lazy. But no, I get it too. Usually for me, when I'm cooking at home, I do what I call the mise en place race, where I start like just doing stuff that I shouldn't be doing. I'm like, oh, okay, now I gotta like cut all this stuff up before that finishes boiling, or before it's time to saute. So it's actually a good way to make your knife skills faster. But then you cut yourself because you're not following the knife skills rules, and now all of a sudden you got a bloody finger and you got to stop the whole process. Now dinner takes a lot longer, right? That's bad execution. Bad execution. I got a no-fail way of cooking rice. I never follow a recipe for that. Yeah, I got a no-fail way too. It's called a Zojirushi Rice Cooker. Okay, if you don't have a Zojirushi Rice Cooker in your life, you're not eating good rice. I'm sorry to have to tell you this. You're not. Okay, Chef Sean at work, he's like, yeah, I make rice all the time at home. I'm like, no, you don't. He's like, yeah, I do. I do it on the stove top. I'm like, no, you don't. That's not rice, brother. It's not rice. I'm just telling you. Like, I love you. I'm telling you this because I love you, right? You're not eating real rice at home because you don't have a Zojirushi rice cooker. Do yourself a favor. You have an amazing wife, right, who puts up with all of your shit. Okay, it's not easy being married to a chef. Do yourself and your family a favor. Go out and buy yourself a Zojirushi rice cooker, my friend. And he went and he did, and he's like, Chef, you know what? I hate saying this, but you were right. For the first time, we've had real rice in the house, and it's been amazing. Great thing about Zojirushis is you can make a big batch. They have a 24-hour hold on it. 24-hour hold. And the next day, right, you make a batch for dinner tonight at 7 p.m. The next day, 24 hours later, it's still perfect. It's still perfect. Yes, they're spendy, but they're worth every single cent. There's not something in my kitchen that I would replace faster than my Zojirushi rice cooker. Like all the lights in my ceiling could go out, and my stove could blow up, and I'd be like, I'll get to it this weekend, right? Zojirushi rice cooker takes a shit, like I'm on Amazon that day with rush shipping. So that's the secret to good rice. And all of you who think you can cook it on the stovetop and the steamer, you think that. You think that. Why? Because you don't have a Zojirushi in your life. I never fully preheat the oven. Yeah, that's really not necessary, especially if you're roasting something. Just add another 10 minutes. I will do anything to reduce the amount of dishes. So will I. Mise en place, no way. Yeah, well, that's why you gotta have a kid. The reason why you have kids is so they can do the dishes. Plating I don't do unless it's a very special meal. Yeah, I never plate. I mean, it's all center plate presentation. I have the mindset of a chef ingrained in me, so I gotta like wipe the rim and not have like splashes everywhere. But it's funny when we do the cooking challenges in the community. Everyone always seems to really be intrigued by plating and wants feedback on their plating, which is great because they're trying to replicate a professional level dish in their home, so I understand where it's coming from. But I mean, truth be told, it's all center of the plate presentation. Sprinkle some fresh herbs over the top. Call it a day. Don't crowd the pan. I have issues with patience on occasion. You probably have issues with browning your food properly too. But if you like steamed vegetables and steamed meat, then crowd away, crowd away. I taste too much while cooking. That's not breaking a rule. Oh, and then I'm not hungry for dinner. Yeah, that's me all the time. I sit down like, I don't really want to eat anymore. When cutting, my non-knife hand is never the formal bear claw knuckle guard. I'm too busy holding the pieces together. Again, if you're not cutting yourself and you're cutting something efficiently, your technique isn't really a big concern of mine. Seems it is a rule to add pepper with salt. Maybe you're new. No, Jody, you've been around for a while. Jody, you've been around for so long. How have you never heard my salt and pepper rant? The salt and pepper rant is what kicked off the whole flavor structure series, right? Salt is a seasoning. Say it with me. Salt is a seasoning. If you ever baked bread and forgotten the salt, it tastes like cardboard. It's a seasoning, right? So you need salt to make something taste more like itself, right? Sprinkle a little bit of salt on some fruit, it tastes more like itself, right? You sprinkle too much on, now it tastes salty, okay? Pepper is a flavor. So you want something to taste like pepper, you add pepper. I want my stroganoff to taste peppery, I'm going to add some black pepper, I'm going to add some green peppercorns. So salt is a seasoning, pepper is a flavoring. Separate the two. This is why if I walk in a professional kitchen and I see that they mix the salt and pepper together, I lose my shit and they get introduced to and that's kind of my technique for management. Is I don't necessarily scream or yell. I have been known to raise my voice on occasion to get my point across, right? So the people further on down the line can also learn the same lesson, so they don't repeat the mistake. But I just bore them with the same lectures over and over and over again, and finally, like, God, if I have to hear the salt is a seasoning and pepper is a flavoring speech one more time from Chef, I'm going to lose my mind, so I'm just never going to do it again, right? And then the problem is solved. I no longer remove avocado pit while holding the half. Bad experience after margaritas. Yeah, that's probably a good one. In fact, the rule is always you never cut towards yourself, and the removing the avocado pit with the blade of your knife is one of those rules that we break. A lot more use of non-stick pans than is considered acceptable. Mise en place. Yeah, I use non-stick pans quite a bit at home, especially when I'm working with glazes. But the problem is when in my non-stick pan versus like stainless steel pan video, where I kind of break down why you'd want to use one over the other. Um, it's because people were trying to brown stuff in non-stick pans and then come to me and be like, Chef, why is this not browning, or why is my browning uneven? And I said, well, because you're using a non-stick pan. Yeah, you can brown evenly in a non-stick pan, but you normally need to lower the heat, and it's going to take longer. So, that's that. I enjoy my non-stick pans. A lot of people don't like mise en place, right? Which is why, by the way, you're all stressed out when you're trying to cook for more than 3 people, because you don't have everything in place, also known as mise en place. Right, so next time you're in your kitchen all stressed out, think to yourself, man, I really wish I had gone through the whole F-step process and planned my prep, my execution, and done some mise en place, and then, had a couple extra dishes left over. I mean, at home, I use the same thing that we use in the restaurant. If I really need to prep stuff out, I use the 9 pans, right? The little tiny rectangle, so they're 9th pans. They're 1/9 of a hotel pan, so you can fit 9 of them into a hotel pan. And they're rectangle, they line up really easy, and they're a cinch to rinse and wash out real quick. I mean, so even if you're doing a really complicated dish, what do you need? Maybe 12 9 pans total? I mean, that's like a restaurant level like preparation, right? So you got 12 9 pans all lined up, ready to rock and roll. It's not that much of a big deal to rinse them out. So people who are saying, oh, I don't do mise en place because I don't like doing the extra dishes. No, you don't do mise en place because you're lazy and you don't think ahead, and you're using the extra dishes as an excuse as a not do mise en place. And then you're wondering why you're getting all stressed out when the big day comes. You're trying to cook for more than 2 people. Sometimes it's my job to give you the tough love. Measuring, unless I'm baking, yeah, for the most part, you can cook to taste. I give people recipes in grams because if they want to replicate the recipe, grams is the most efficient and accurate way to do so. Dry meat before you brown it. That's a really good technique. So if you don't dry your meat before you brown it, that's for people who like steamed meat and for whatever reason have an issue with browning meat. Started, yep. Okay, I think that's enough. There's still a lot more stuff here. But I think that was a good discussion. Hope you all enjoyed it. Let's check the questions. Going through. Let's see. Oh, you like rice in the Zojirushi better than cooked in a steam oven or combi oven? Yes, 100%. And the only reason why I didn't say yes 1,000% because you can only get 100% if we're being honest. I always want to be honest with you, okay? That's the thing. People forget, okay? I've been in this hustle for 20 years. I have done every hack and trick and sideways step because I'm in the weeds and getting crushed. That is in the book, right? I've steamed rice in a steamer. I've boiled it on the stove like it's pasta, which is actually decent for brown rice, not so much for white rice. I've done tabletop steamers. I've done combi ovens. I've done various different rice cookers. I've done all the different tricks and tips and hacks and whatever, right? Zojirushi rice cooker. If you love rice, it will enhance your life unbelievably. And if you hate rice, it's probably because you don't have a Zojirushi rice cooker. So yeah, I do like it better than a combi oven. Okay, and that's it for those. Let's double check here. All right. Oh, what's my take on steel pans? Here's my take on steel pans. So if you're talking like blue steel pans, the kind of like that you see in like a French kitchen, they're great. They work fine. They're awesome. There's no problem with them. But for the most part, I use stainless steel pans. Why? Because they're cheap and they're light and they're easy to care for, right? The actual like blue steel pans, they're like a cast iron pan, They seem like a good idea, but then they're so finicky and like God forbid you forget to wipe out that last little drop of water and don't salt it and use soap and all these little things. It's like, God, you work for me. I don't work for you, right? So that's why I have a love-hate relationship with cast iron because it's great, but it's also care intensive. And I'm busy. You're a professional cook. You're busy, right? You're cooking at home as a hobby. You're busy, right? You forget to wipe out the water, and now it's all rusted. Now everything's ruined. And now it's a whole ordeal. You got to go back through. You got to reseason everything, right? So cast iron pans are great. Blue steel pans are fine. But for me, I use stainless steel pans and cheap ones. I use Update brand. Why? Because I can beat the hell out of them in a professional kitchen. They last about 2 years, and when I got to replace a 12-inch Update pan, it cost me like $30 versus like $200 for the fancy Calphalon. And then I use nonstick pans for things I don't want to stick, like eggs and things of that nature. So that's my take on pans. Ever consider Zoom cook-along sessions? Funny, you should mention that. And yes, John, stainless steel is better than aluminum. That's where I draw the line. Okay, aluminum is cheap; it gets banged up, right? I don't force my professional cooks to cook with aluminum pans. If you walk into a kitchen that has a professional kitchen that has aluminum pans, turn around and run the other way, because the chef doesn't give a shit about you or the food that you're cooking. Okay, that's just being honest. So yeah, stainless steel is better than aluminum. Have you ever considered doing a Zoom cook-along session? Yes, I have. In fact, today, I am actually, so here's the deal, right? While we're watching this, I just got a notification. I sold another Culinary Bootcamp PDF. I've also locked up the F-STEP lecture series, and people have been buying it. And it's been great. You know why it's been great? Because it actually brings revenue into Stella Culinary, so I'm no longer actually just paying all this stuff out of my pocket, and things get expensive. So I was able to go ahead and say, screw it, let's buy a combi oven and shoot some video on the combi ovens, right? And today I'm getting ready to pull the trigger on a really nice Canon camera that I've had my eye on for a while, the XA11 for all you camera dorks out there. It's a camcorder that's going to streamline my video shooting, and also it's going to make live streaming easier. So here I'm just live streaming off of a webcam, trapped in my wife's crochet room. But I do plan on bringing you guys out into the kitchen. But if we're going to live stream some cook-alongs together, which I have every intent of doing, I need the proper equipment because I'm not going to do some hokey BS live stream. So the live stream Zoom cookings are on the docket. First, I got to get back into production of my regular YouTube videos while maintaining the podcast. All right. Did I lie? Was I lying? Was that not the greatest podcast episode ever? I mean, come on, guys. Rib update, a beef bourguignon breakdown through the F-STEP lens, right? That it's going to help you again. And is there anything better than absolutely demoralizing and crushing the soul of your culinary competition? Everyone has one, right? Everyone has like that uncle or that neighbor or that friend who thinks they're all cool because, they watched a YouTube video, bro, and check out this technique, and Alton Brown does this, and you come in and you drop some flavor structure, just boom, flavor structure, boom, technique, right? This is how we do it. This is the F-STEP way, right? All right, I'm getting a little bit worked up. Okay, great one. I'm fired up. What a great way to start the weekend. What a great way. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. More to come. And I will catch you all on the flip side.